I did it again, guys. Okay. I was going to say your name and I didn't ask you how to pronounce it. This is like my toxic trait as a podcast host. Like, I never know how to say people's names. How do you pronounce your first name?
I will give you some credit here. My name is Ashurina. So my first name is Ashurina.
Yeah, it's not like Sarah.
Yeah. Like when I go to the doctor's office and there's a pause, I'm like, it's me. It's my turn. So
yeah. Ashurina. Okay. So excited to have you on. I first wanted to ask you about your background in psychology, like what your training was in, and then how that kind of merged into social media, how you got started on social media.
Totally. I have, I don't even know if I ever usually answer this question. I have a master's and doctorate degree in clinical psychology, and started off doing a lot of different work. I started off working in eating disorder recovery, body image work.
That's what my PhD is in eating disorders. That's so random.
I know. I love that work. I find it fascinating. I found it very fulfilling. And I moved into like a lot of health psychology and like neurocognitive work, doing a lot of evaluations for any kind of cognitive issues. I also worked in psycho-oncology, like MD Anderson Cancer Center here in the US is pretty big. And then I went on maternity leave. I became a mom. I was actually experiencing some perinatal mood and anxiety disorders during my pregnancy and didn't really have the vocabulary for it. I don't think I had the words for what my experience, like what I was going through, which is so strange as a psychologist, to not know what I'm experiencing, but knowing like I don't feel like myself. So I went through this experience in my pregnancy, and backstory, I had a lot of fertility challenges, miscarriages, and then now I'm pregnant. I'm super anxious. And then I have my son and I'm like, oh, I'm on edge. Like I am stressed out. I'm anxious. I'm worried about everything. I don't feel like myself. Is this what everyone's been like raving about? Because it's not my experience, you know?
Hashtag blessed.
Yes. And after I went through that, I was like, I need to know more. There's no way I'm going to be able to just like forget this ever happened. And that's where I kind of dived really deep into perinatal mental health. Started my training then, and my son was tiny. And I was still like in the throes of postpartum doing this research into what it was all about. And then there was no looking back for me. At that point, I was like, you know what? If I'm a psychologist and I'm going through this and I didn't have a clue about this experience, then I wonder what the rest of the parents out there are experiencing. And I want to shed some light on this experience. And that's kind of, I started off, I was still working at the hospital, but then I would like post some stuff on social media here and there. And I found out like people actually wanted to know more about that. And then all of these moms particularly were coming like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what that was called. I didn't know that's my experience too. There's a word for that. And it took off and there's no turning back. And obviously my experience was challenging, but it serves a pretty big purpose.
How old is your son?
5.5.
Oh, okay. Milo's 4. So similar, but similar to you, when I was experiencing like in postpartum, even just things that are like normal with regard to like everyone is experiencing, like the recovery and the waking at night. And I was just like, does everybody feel this way? Like, I'm shocked. And then I remember thinking back to everyone that I knew who had recently had a baby and like my visits with them and how like they didn't say anything and like they just seemed totally fine. And I'm like, am I the only one that finds this incredibly difficult? And but it's not. But I'm happy that the conversation is kind of, you know, people are being more open about it and like, yeah, this is really hard. And I was always like, I have a super supportive partner and like we don't struggle financially, and like I'm still like, this is so hard. So I'm always thinking about what other people must be going through. So yeah, and that's kind of like how I started doing all of this too. I was like, this is a wild experience. Nobody talks about it, so I'm going to start making TikToks and start a podcast, and now that's just what I do. So Yeah. Yay us.
There's definitely a need, right?
Yeah.
It's like if people are like, they're so fascinated and interested because there's a need.
Yeah. No, 100%. Okay. So the first, I gave you some topics that I wanted to chat with you about, and I had them in a specific order. And then you sent me a blog post on one of the topics that I wanted to talk about. And I was like, this has to be first because it's so important. People, like listeners of the show, love relationship stuff. So these are all, I love all the points in that blog post. So the title is 5 Traps That Parents Should Avoid with regard to their relationship. So I kind of wanted to pick your brain about each of these points. So the first one is not sharing the load of parenthood. So can we chat a little bit about that?
Yes, of course we can. So if you are, if you're a parent, you know there's a load. And if it's often is kind of invisible load, and we refer to it primarily as the invisible load of motherhood because women, mothers tend to kind of get defaulted into these roles. So invisible work is the unnoticed, uncompensated physical, mental, emotional labor that kind of gets completed behind the scenes, and it helps keep your house going. I mean, you're thinking of anything from like the dishes to packing the lunches, filling out the forms for the school. But then there's other things that are like the emotional load that we carry, helping our children navigate tantrums and when they're upset or they're hurt. But then there's this really, really, really big piece of this, and it's the mental load. And as a mom myself, and as a mom yourself, you know that like that little Rolodex of things to do is never ending. And we carry that load. We're like thinking ahead, like, okay, I need to actually change out those clothes because they're all getting a little too small. And, you know, he's got high waters right now and it's cold outside and none of these fit. So your brain is filled with this invisible mental load as well. So there's all of these things. And we think about how overwhelming that is. But moms, historically, and the research supports this, is that they carry most of this load. They get defaulted into this role. And because they do, the load isn't shared equally. And when the load isn't shared equally, I mean, what happens? This breeds bitterness, resentment. You don't feel like you're in a fair partnership. You start to feel distant from your partner. And that's where this is really important to address because, I mean, who wants to be in a partnership where they feel like they are carrying a majority of the load? It reminds me of like when you are in school and you're doing like a group presentation and that one person does all the work and then everybody else skates by with the A. Maybe not the best comparison, but you get what I'm saying.
It makes sense. Yeah, totally.
And so when we're in this partnership and it isn't shared, you're like, well, great. You just got a free ride.
Yeah. And like sometimes it's even hard to verbalize what it is that is the mental load that you are doing all day. Like I remember in quarantine when my husband would come home and be like, oh, what'd you do today? I'm like, I can't even answer this question, but I haven't stopped moving. But like, I can't tell you what I've been doing. Sometimes I want to attach like a GoPro to my head and just be like, this is everything that I've done, you know? Because it's hard to answer. Even with my job that I do right now, like with social media and like the podcast, it's nonstop, tiny little tasks all day. And so when it's like, oh, what'd you do today? I'm like, I haven't stopped, but I can't really give you an answer. So how do you recommend people, if they want to share that load, how do you go about bringing that up with your partner and kind of identifying things that they could be taking over?
Well, there's a number, and I think this is going to look really different for different families. And obviously our partner can't take over. Like I don't expect my partner to take over all of my mental load because some of that stuff is just my stuff.
Yes. Like guilt. I used to get so jealous. Like, like how are you not like having mental guilt right now? You know, if we're watching a movie on the weekend or something and my husband's able to just chill and enjoy that moment. And I'm like, oh my God, we should be doing something. Like we, you know, got to go to the park. Like, so yeah, some of it is impossible to
yeah, I'm not going to like tell you to worry about. I actually just had this conversation last week. it's like a silly system here in Arizona for school. I did all, this is the labor that's invisible here. I'm just going to go ahead and document it because I need a pat on the back.
Yeah.
But it was like registering our son for kindergarten. And I did like all the research to figure out like what school, like, because it's like it's like a lottery system for some of the local schools here. You enter your name in a lottery by a certain deadline, and then they tell you if like your kid is in the school. It's like a public charter school. So I did all this work, and I get like an email, and it's like, oh, he got offered a seat there. Cool. This is a free school. This is a free program. It's local to me. This is all great news. And I did all the back work. My husband just showed up, he got his gold star. I'm being funny, but it's like, and then I'm like, whoo, I went to go talk to him about it. I'm like, aren't you so relieved that's taken care of? Like, weren't you a little worried? And he's like, no.
Yeah.
No. Why would I worry about that? He's like, I mean, whatever, we'd have figured it out. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, sure.
Yeah. And one thing that I don't think people talk about is I feel like for the most part, it's moms who are following parenting accounts, who are listening to parenting podcasts. So we're gathering all these tools to be able to manage certain situations with our children, like whether it be like a meltdown or a tantrum, bedtime struggles. And that is also like a huge invisible load. Like you're the one that is, taking time to learn tools and strategies to parent, and your partner might not be doing the same. I know my husband doesn't. Like, he would never be like, oh, we're having a difficult bedtime. Let me like look into this and, pick someone's brain that's like a sleep specialist. Like, never. So then now you're relaying that information to your partner, and you've already done all the work gathering that information. Mm-hmm. Nobody talks about that part of it.
No. And I think there's a number of things here. So this goes back to like, obviously what we value, and our partner is not going to value all the things that we value. So I jokingly, I poke fun at my husband, but like, honestly, that's not something he values. And he would have been just great figuring it out last minute, and it wouldn't have stressed him out at all. And when we think about it, we have to sit down and think about like the big picture view. We have to think about like, is there a right or wrong way? Sometimes this includes safety, obviously there is a right or wrong way.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that we want them done in a certain way, and that makes it a bit more challenging, right? But when we're talking about the load and how we redistribute this, and this is something that I talk about quite frequently, you almost have to kind of have like a team meeting with your partner where you sit down and you talk about like, okay, I don't maybe know, maybe I don't have like all of the words because this is challenging. It's not like I can like come up with every single thing I do, but let's go through some of the tasks that are within our home, within our system that are important. Maybe this is the morning routine, drop-offs for school, who's making meals, bedtime routine. You have to figure out what these are for your family. And you sit down together, you write down all of your tasks, but you also want your partner to include some of the tasks that they do that contribute to the household. Because my guess is there are going to be some tasks that they do that you kind of like just not thought about too much.
Breaking down boxes in the garage.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are plenty of things, right, that each of us contribute to the relationship, to the home dynamic. And you want to like write them all down and then say like, okay, whose name are we going to write next to this task? Who's going to take ownership of this task? Because what we find is when two people sit down, they talk about this and they agree, there's an agreement, things feel more fair. And that is where it's important. And it's not going to always be even. I think that is the misconception that we have, that it's always going to be 50-50. Like you're going to go through seasons of your life where you're going to carry more of the load. And then there's going to be another season where maybe your partner is carrying more of the load. And this will just be, it'll wax and wane throughout the course of your partnership and throughout your family system. So you want to have these conversations. You want to agree on things, but then you also want to kind of check back in. Like, okay, I noticed this is what we talked about. This is happening this way and it's not working, or we agreed on this, but you know what? Like there's a lack of follow through on my end or your end or whatever what that might look like. And you want to continue having these conversations. It's going to feel really weird at first. Like, are we having like a lunch meeting at home about, it's going to feel weird. But the more that you're having these conversations, it's the better it is, because your partner might be completely unaware And it's not that they are not on board to help, or I don't even like to use the word help. They don't want to like co-parent with you, or they don't want to come alongside you to do the tasks of the home that two people should be responsible for. They are kind of like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. But thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to intentionally, ignore that or not do that. But
I remember someone messaged me the other day. I don't know what it was. Like she was replying to one of my stories or something. And she was saying how typically she would in the evening give all the kids a bath and do that whole thing while her husband did other stuff. And she was like, I had to actually verbalize to him, like, you give the kids a bath. I've been with them all day. That's helping me. Like, that's a break. But he had no clue that, a break from childcare would be something that she would want, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, oh, she's giving the kids a bath. But when you've been with little kids all day,
Yeah. You're like, I just need to not do this.
Yeah. So like, it's true. Like he was probably, doing other stuff while she got that done. And I was like, yes, like good for you for realizing that need in yourself, but then also verbalizing it in a way that was not like, trying like where they get defensive. It was just like, oh, I had no idea that would help you. So yeah, I love that topic. Okay, the second, all these topics I could talk like forever about. The second one was that couples don't know how to communicate. So you mentioned like the I statements versus the you statements. So important.
I always, every single client I meet with, we talk about sending a message how you'd like to receive it. Whew, that's hard. When we are feeling resentful, when we're feeling bitter, when we feel like we're carrying the load, you want to resort back to like, you want to attack in a sense.
Yeah.
You want your partner to feel all the feelings that you've been holding inside. And I get that. Those feelings are justified for a lot of people. If you have been doing a lot of this on your own, or you are not on the same page with your partner. But when we're yelling, when we're blaming, or we're avoiding, storming out, stonewalling, whatever the case may be, we're not working as a team. And the whole thing with communicating with our partner is you always want to send a message how you'd like to receive it, but you want to remember what that goal is, like the overarching goal of your communication. And you think about it from the perspective of, do we want to be on the same page? At the end of this, do I want us to have like a stronger relationship? Do I want it to work better? Or is this just about helping my partner understand how deeply I'm feeling this pain or this, unfairness or whatever the case may be? And even if that is the answer, there's a way to do that that isn't so harmful. I always like to do a little bit of perspective taking when it comes to communication. And I do this myself, a psychologist. I meet with parents and couples all the time. And if something is bothering me in my relationship, I'm like, ooh, I just want to say, this right now. And then I'm like, okay, Ashurina, but like, would you want to hear that ever? Would you ever want to hear that? And what would you do if you did hear that? Probably not anything good. So I always have to take that perspective and think, okay, now how do I want to say this? I want to communicate some basic things. My feelings, my positive needs. This is like a really easy framework to think of it. What are my feelings? What are my positive needs? And then adding on like what I'd like to see happen. So like I have been feeling really overwhelmed lately and making it about me, like what that is. My positive need, I need you to give the kids a bath tonight. And that would be so incredibly helpful to me because it would make me feel like, the load is a bit more fair around here, or whatever the case may be. And I'm not giving people scripts because scripts are whatever. But
people are like writing notes.
I know. Yeah. Like, I'm like, that's not it. But, I want to talk, like, we always want to do that because when we start, the blaming, you never, we can't really do a whole lot with the criticism. Like, you never do this, or you always do that, or you suck at this. That's kind of dead end. But when we talk about what our feeling is and what our positive need is, that we can take action from those, with those shifts in our communication. And that's where we give our partner something to work on, something that they actually feel invested in. Like, okay, well, I see this is causing harm. I see that there's a need. I can move with this. But now you just blame me I'm really defensive and I want to attack too. So this takes a lot of work. And I know that I could go on and on and on about that, but that's like the basic framework for we need to learn how to communicate with one another where it makes sense. And we're working towards this overarching goal that we actually want to move forward as a couple.
And oftentimes, like I always tell people, try not to react in the moment because you haven't had time to even understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling and like how you can frame it in a positive way. Like and I talk about this all the time, but it's the perfect example of when my husband would come home from work in quarantine. He's a physician, so he was working. I would get so irritated. And it took me a few days and I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Like I'm so excited for him to come home because I've been home alone with like an 18-month-old all day. So why am I so irritated once he comes in the door? So I like sat there thinking about it and I'm like, oh, it's because I expect him to come in and hang out with us, like take over childcare, like so I can go do other stuff around the house that I've wanted to get done, whatever. But he would come in, say hi, and like go start making dinner or washing the dishes. It was always washing the dishes. And I was like, okay, like, so like nothing changed. I've been home alone all day and then he's finally home. I've been waiting all day and then he's just off doing something. Mm-hmm. So I had to be like, I'm really excited for you to get home. And then you come home and like, it's almost like my feelings are hurt because you're not like hanging out with us, like you're going to do the dishes. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, I wish my husband would do the dishes. I'm like, that's not the point. That's not my need in that moment. Like I want to connect with my husband. But it was very much like, okay, why do I feel this way? What are like my expectations when he does come home? You know, sometimes I think we're not even aware of what our expectations are. And it's like, you know, I assumed my whole life was going to change once he walked through the door. So I had to kind of like reel that in and be like, you know, my life's not going to change that much mm-hmm. when he comes home. Mm-hmm. So yeah. The third one was that you're getting the wrong kind of support. I love this one.
You just gave it to us.
Yeah.
You just gave it to us.
Yeah. Asking for what we need. Yes. And then it's funny because as a woman, because I have talked about these examples, you know, another example was him making pancakes on Saturday morning. It's very specific because like, I think it's good to be specific, you know, like again, like finally it's Saturday morning, we're both at home, we can chill with our coffee and he's up making pancakes, like this big breakfast in the kitchen. So I'm back to doing childcare by myself again while he's like dilly-dallying in the kitchen. And so when I put content like this out, people lose their damn minds because they're like, your poor husband, like he just, you know, you should be thanking him. He's coming home doing the dishes. He's making breakfast on Saturday morning. And I'm like, but that's not my need, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah, elaborate on that. I could talk all day about this.
No, this is exactly it. And I think it's so important when we talk about like what our needs are. And often our partner will provide support in the way that they appreciate it, in the way that they desire it. And they think they're doing a stellar job because they're like, oh, I'd love for somebody to come home and wash the dishes.
Or make me pancakes.
Yes. Maybe he's like an acts of service kind of guy.
He is.
Okay. You know, so this would make perfect sense. And for you, that is not your need. That's not what fills your tank. That's not what makes you feel refueled to show up as the best mom, wife, partner, you know, colleague, whatever it may be. So yes, it's very important to get the right kind of support, because if we have a need for support and we're getting support, but it's not what we need, it's kind of null, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, that's nice.
But sometimes it even backfires. It's like, this is actually the opposite of what I need, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of women, like when they hear my examples like that, they're like, oh my God, they feel like they're not even allowed to feel upset that their husband's making a big breakfast. He's gone to cut the grass for 2 hours on Saturday afternoon. Like, because it's something productive and on paper it looks great, they feel like they can't even bring it up as, you know, something that they would maybe want to change. It's hard.
That right there, though, when we think about that message and where we learned this message, that we as women, and I'm going to go there, like we as women, like it's like, okay, well, if we're getting a need met or we're getting some kind of support, it's better than, you know, no support. And this goes back to early programming and the life that, you know, you think about how generationally, how we're raised, where oftentimes we're raised in systems, not all for everybody, but in many cases, we are raised in a system where we're not allowed to have needs as kids. Generationally speaking, I'm a millennial, an elder millennial, I don't know. But we're not allowed to have these specific needs because, you know, people your parents might say that you're not allowed to have those feelings. You're not allowed to express those needs or those wants. So it's really tricky for us to understand what those needs are when we've lived in a system or like any length of time where someone is telling us that we're not allowed to express those things. And then you add another layer of being a woman and where it is not necessarily, I don't want to say it's not acceptable, but it's not like it's advertised that women should be speaking their needs, asking for what they want and desire, because we're seen as being bitchy, being aggressive, being, you name it, whatever label it is. So it adds to these stereotypical gendered norms of what a woman should be like, what she should accept, or, you know, how her partner should contribute to a relationship, and she should basically just zip it and accept what is. And I know I'm going like, that's a little maybe off for some people, but I think that this speaks to that. It's like, we're not allowed to ask for what we need because we're seen a certain way. And that's where we need to kind of break out of the box and say, no, in fact, I am allowed to have very specific needs for support, and I'm allowed to communicate them. And my need for support might not match up to my partner's desire to provide support, but we can talk about this and we can figure out what it is that works in our partnership. And that is so important. That's important work. It's breaking generational cycles. It's showing up in your relationship in a meaningful way. It's going to allow you to develop deeper intimacy in your relationship because you're like, wow, this is what I'm talking about, right? Not only like I have a need, you're filling this need, and we're not going to always get it right. It's not going to always be perfect, but man, we are working on this. We're working on this together. So I think that you asking for specifics on what those needs are, sometimes this is hard because if you are used to suppressing what those needs are as a woman or as a mom, it's going to take some work to figure out, well, what is it? What was it that I needed right there? And like for you, you're like, I don't want to be doing any more childcare right here. And I can relate to that. I'm like, I will pack lunches. You do bed and bath time. I just need a quiet minute, you know?
Yeah, totally. And then sometimes you also get met with like, oh, your husband comes home and does the dishes. Like mine goes and plays video games. And it's like, do you follow Laura Danger, That Darn Chat? She talks a lot about like the division of labor and like fair play and whatnot. And anyways, she had this quote. I don't know if it was her quote or from somewhere else, but it was basically like mediocre men benefit from like shitty men because that's our comparison, right? Like, oh, your husband does the dishes. Well, mine plays video games. So you're lucky, you know, instead of being like, okay, well, can't we like reach for the stars?
No, the bar is low.
Yeah, totally.
Like on the floor sometimes, but hey, it's on the...
Anyway, you should follow her. She has great content.
I will for sure.
Okay, number 4, expectations. We already kind of talked a little bit about it, but yeah, what are your thoughts on expectations?
I think that having unrealistic expectations, I mean, this happens. It's a part of life, right? It's like saying, I expected you to do X, Y, and Z the way that I do it. Sometimes these are the unrealistic expectations that we project on our partner. And that is the challenging part. Or we expect them to know and understand things without communicating them. And I think this is the challenge. And I know this is a big thing because we already carry so much of this invisible labor that we're like, I don't want to now have to tell you what to do. I don't want to have to tell you to go look at, all of these things and, make sure that you're doing this correctly. I don't want to have to micromanage you. You just got to show up and do it. So there's a piece of this that I like to say, like, coming alongside your partner. It's like you don't want to have to coach them or parent them. You want them to know, and you want to trust that they know how to do these things. But there is a learning curve there. There are like, okay, for example, is your husband going to know that when he comes home and he's washing the dishes that it's going to irk you? No. Like, that's something I need to tell him, right?
Yeah, he was shocked. He was like, what?
He's like, thought I was doing great here.
He's like, let me get this straight. You don't want me to wash the dishes. Like, no.
You're like, I want you to do that after you've done bedtime. I'm totally kidding here. People are going to come at me. No, but I think that it's like, okay, identifying, am I setting an unrealistic expectation on my partner? Am I expecting them to do something I haven't communicated? Am I expecting them to do something that I actually do? Because they are their own person. And for example, they're going to do bedtime how they do bedtime. And I can't be like, okay, well, you didn't put the right pajamas on, or you didn't read the book that we had set out. Like, these are things that are like throwaway things. Let your partner figure it out for themselves. But sometimes we do, because we're so used to being that primary caretaker, or we're used to being that default parent. And we have a way of doing things that we're like, you're not doing it right. And that's where we have to really be like, okay, well, is this unrealistic? Because I mean, I'm sure I'm doing this differently than, so many parents out there. Is there a right or wrong way to do this? Is this a non-negotiable? And those are some of the unrealistic expectations that I'm talking about.
Yeah. And does it matter?
Totally.
Like, does it really matter that my husband doesn't rinse his hair as much as I would like to rinse his hair? Like, no, it doesn't. Like, it's going to be okay. So
we'll survive it.
Just move along. Okay. The last one is resentment. I liked your examples that you gave in that blog post. So let's chat about resentment. I felt like what you were describing in the blog post was a little bit like martyr syndrome as well, like getting frustrated and just like, oh, I'll just do it myself. And like, instead of asking for help. Yeah.
So resentment is toxic to a relationship, right? And often what resentment is a product of is this buildup of unmet needs. And I'll give another example. I can't even remember the example in the blog, but I will give you an example of this. Your partner leaving to go do something for themselves. Like, maybe they golf, maybe they spend time with their friends, maybe they have like whatever hobby, they go to do it. And you say, oh, cool. Yeah. Like, that's great. You can do that. You should do that. I don't know what the setup is in your relationship. And you are fuming and you don't say anything, but you're like, whatever, I'll do this. I'll stay home with the kids another day. I mean, I've only been doing it for 5 full days, and hey, and you're not expressing that there is a need there. There are feelings there. And you're saying to your partner, hey, that's fine. I don't mind. And now when they come home, you're arguing about them not throwing away like a dirty napkin, or they didn't put their dish in the sink or in the dishwasher, and you're fighting about something that's like kind of irrelevant, off topic, and that wouldn't necessarily upset you in a normal situation, but you have so much resentment towards this relationship because something feels unfair. And that's what when we're talking about resentment, it's a product of that unmet need, and what that need is looks different for every partnership. And in your partnership, maybe it's like saying, actually, no, I'm not okay with that because I wanted you to stay home and we could do something as a family, or I wanted to take a break. Or it could look like, I'm feeling resentful because me observing you going to do fun things is a reminder of everything I've lost. I don't have my social, engagement right now. I'm not being social with friends. I'm not getting to have time away. And this just feels like salt on a wound because I'm not getting to take that time for myself. So this can show up in a number of ways. And obviously this is one example of how resentment can build. But when we don't communicate like how you're truly feeling, and instead you're stuffing it, or you've got like all these unmet needs for maybe time for yourself, or being social, or feeling just like a human being outside of being a mother or wife or partner, whatever the case may be, you're going to notice these feelings creep up. And that's why it's so important to address this, to talk about it, like really quickly. I mean, I know it's hard to do it immediately, but to talk about it. Maybe that happened and maybe your partner went out golfing. The golfing is like such a common theme.
I'm sorry. I can't thank God my husband does not golf. And he's terrible at it because, like, I'm sorry, a hobby that lasts all day on like a Saturday, like, no.
Off limits in my house.
Yeah.
I mean,
not happening.
No, maybe during retirement. Yeah, I know. That's such a big one. And honestly, I feel like it comes up every time I meet with parents. It's like golfing. They call it, now there's like a term for it, like a golf widow, where, somebody will say my partner goes golfing all day and then I'm left with another day. So it's like, let me be honest about these feelings. What can happen? Can this change? Can we say this is not a good idea or a good hobby? Or can we say like, okay, well, if that's the case for Saturday, on Sunday, I'm going to go do whatever it is that fills my cup. But having an agreement with your partner.
Resentment too. I feel like for the most part, like the mom has the baby. The mom is the one that takes like the leave from work. They are recovering. And it's easy for their partner to maintain his friendships and regular social life as it was pre-baby. And then moms get sucked into this like being isolated and like, having to stop going to the gym because they're recovering and then not seeing friends. And it's like, it's easy for couples to fall into that, I think, where one partner, keeps up with all their hobbies and is still a fulfilled human being, like all parts of a human being, whereas the mom loses a lot of that. And so, yeah, resentment central, like.
Yeah, the one theme that comes up for so many moms, this came up for me too, is that your whole world gets shifted. Everything shifts. You go from being maybe in a career, and that's where I was. And then now I'm like, well, how do I reconcile being like, I want to be a career person to being a mom? How do I bring these two together? I did feel really isolated, and many of the moms I meet with feel the same. And then like add in all of the different elements of like my changing body, my changing identity, my changing, career path. For me, there was so many big ones, but I was breastfeeding and I was like, I'm like tied down to this baby. That's not the experience of everybody. Everybody is something different, but I'm like, I can't even leave for, an hour and a half. I'm like on the clock. So I've got to like feed, jet out if I want to do anything and come right back. And it felt like everything had changed. And, I'm up, my body hurts, all of these things. And then my husband, it doesn't matter, he was as supportive as he wanted to be, as he could be. He could get up and be like, well, I'm going to go run some errands. And I'm like, don't leave me. Don't leave me.
Like, no.
Yeah, it's like, this isn't fair. And their ability to get up and go or go to a meeting or even go to work for so many partners, it's like for so many couples, your partner going to work and being able to be social. I can't tell you how many moms I've met with that have said, he's on a work trip and I know he's working and I know he's providing, but he's going to have a hot meal while he's there. He's going to get to sleep in a warm bed and no one's going to wake up. Yeah. There's all these elements that although they are not intended to do harm, they are not intended to create resentment. They do because so much has shifted for mom that maybe has not shifted for dad in a heterosexual partnership.
Yeah. I used to be so jealous of his 20-minute commute to work. I was like, 20 minutes to be in a car by yourself, listening to, like, that's living the dream right there. Like, I know. And people think it sounds nuts, but like, that's the truth. And anywho, okay, let's move on to mom guilt quickly. Okay, I wanted to talk about guilt versus shame.
Yeah.
And then also just pick your brain for why on earth do moms experience so much guilt, this like nagging feeling in our minds that we constantly have, but I don't have that in any other area of my life. Never have experienced that until I became a mom. So like, why? Like, help us all.
This is important. I think guilt and shame get mixed up quite a bit. And I think often we might actually be experiencing shame, but we're describing it as guilt, and that's fine because I think this is just a common way that people have described this. But these are both obviously human experiences, human emotions. When we think about guilt, guilt is often something that nudges us, that tells us, okay, I've done something wrong. I maybe have wronged somebody, and it can be helpful. I will say that guilt can be helpful, because an example I have is for, say I say something to my son and it hurts his feelings and he tells me that, or I see that, I'm observing it. Guilt nudges me to shift, to pivot, to say, you know what? I'm really sorry for what I said. So it nudges me to do like a behavioral change and says like, okay, I can course correct. So guilt isn't always all that bad. I mean, sometimes guilt can be unhelpful because it can nudge us in a wrong way. Like, for example, if I set a boundary with a family member and I say, hey, I don't want you to, I don't know, whatever the boundary is. I'm not going to even give you a boundary right now. People are going to latch on to it. And they don't respond in the way that I desire or I want to. And instead of saying like, oh no, I'm allowed to have my boundary, I think, okay, I did something wrong because of the way that they responded. So it can be unhelpful. But it can be helpful. Shame is not helpful. Shame is when we take these feelings and these thoughts and we internalize them and we think something is wrong with me. I am flawed. I am inadequate. And we kind of internalize all of these thoughts and these feelings and we self-deprecate. So we start to, really come down on ourselves. And I think sometimes we think if we shame ourselves enough, we can change behavior or be a better version of ourselves. But that's not the way it works. We can't shame ourselves into behavioral change that's meaningful. It actually just brings down our self-esteem, makes us feel worse about ourselves, and does not help our relationships any. So that's the difference between guilt and shame. Now, why do moms feel guilt? This is the $1 million question. So why do moms feel guilt? Well, there's a number of things. I think there's what we have learned throughout the course of our lives of this concept of a good enough mother. What is a good mom? What does she look like? What does she do? How does she respond? And we kind of set that as this bar of expectation, a measuring stick of some sort. And anytime that we are actually human and don't meet this really unrealistic expectation, we now start to feel these feelings of guilt. Like I'm getting these nudges that I'm not doing enough. And I mean, where do these ideas of a good mother come from? Like you think about it, like, did I have a really great mom? And maybe she didn't ever express her feelings. Maybe she was kind of like the martyr mom. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I had a mom that wasn't so great and I want to be everything she wasn't. Or I see what social media has, portrayed mothers to be. You see like the really beautiful homes with the well-behaved kids, with the couples that are always on vacation. And they're like, the mom is balancing all the things. She's making the home cooked meals. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong of like, that's your jam. Do it. That's great. But when we internalize that as like some expectation for what a good mom is, and when we're not meeting that criteria, we always feel like we're falling short or we're ruining our kids. Mm-hmm. Now that's just like the expectation of everything. And when we're falling short of this expectation, but there's a number of things. I mean, there's a number of things that contribute to this guilt. Guilt can be a good thing in motherhood because it tells us that we really, really value this role, that we want to do a good job, that we want to make sure we're raising resilient kids that are cared for and loved. So when we do mess up, it nudges us. Like that example I shared, I have been there. I have said things. I have done things. And I'm like, oh, I need to course correct. This isn't the best way. And so it does help. It can help us and nudge us. But we just have to be careful that we don't fall into the sinkhole of what, society or what social media tells us you need to do to be a good mom. Because truly what you need to do is you need to show up. You need to be consistent. You need to just allow our children to feel seen, loved, heard. Because that, and I know I'm going on a tangent here because I want this to be a message that's heard. In all my years of therapy, I've been doing this for over a decade. One of the very first questions I ask, like when I'm diving deep into people's stories, I ask them about their relationships with their parents. And no one has ever in my lifetime of doing this work said to me, you know what? My mom didn't make me home cooked meals, or she made us wear these clothes that didn't match, or she didn't buy me this or that. Everybody, and I tell you what, like I've seen the whole lifespan, always talk about how they felt. Did my mom make me feel appreciated? Did she make me feel loved? Did she respect me? Did she show affection? Did she make me feel safe? Those are the things we talk about in therapy. No one's ever coming to me with all of these, all the extras, which is, if you want to do it, great, do it. But I don't want that to be a measuring stick for what a good mom is.
That's not what matters in the end. Like when you were saying that during my PhD training, I did a ton of the adult attachment interview. So like doing the interviews with people. And it's all about your relationship with your caregivers as a child. And not one like that kind of stuff.
You're not assessing for like,
no.
Are you wearing, neutral muted tones?
Only. Yeah, it's so true. And I also think there's the guilt with regard to like what you're doing as a mom. But I think from day one, it also starts as like, you feel like you don't feel like you should, or you're not experiencing motherhood like everybody else is. Because in movies, in TV, like on social media, it's depicted as, like I was saying, #blessed. Like, and I used to use this example. I think I made a TikTok about it. It was like the mom that, oh yeah, like they were up last night 10 times and, I didn't get any sleep, but I'm so blessed that I got all those extra snuggles in. And I'm like, what? Like, no, because when I'm up, like, that's great if that's actually how you feel. But people aren't open about like, this can be extremely difficult and not enjoyable. Like, not enjoyable. It's hard. We love our children. But like, I didn't enjoy playing with Milo when he was young. Like, I didn't enjoy it at all. Like, I thought that was normal, but I think a lot of people feel that and think like, oh my God, I'm a shitty mom because look at, so-and-so. They're doing all these things with their kids. They love it. Like, it's like the things that you're doing, but also you feel like you're not feeling what other people are feeling, if that makes sense. I was rage texting my husband every day when I was having hard days. Yeah.
I was not #blessed. I was like, when are you going to be here? I am drowning. Like, you won't even believe this. And I'm sure like he felt like crap, on the receiving end of thinking like, I wish I was there too. But yeah, I think there's something to be said. And you can enjoy it. And I know that we're all different people and we all need different things and we all desire different things in this lifetime. And I think that is the challenge. The challenge is we all have different values and priorities and things that we love that make us feel more like ourselves. And we think of like the mom role, and when we step into it, if one person or a group of people says that this is the best time of their lives and they're enjoying being up all night, it can feel like I'm doing something wrong. I will tell you, I did not feel good waking up that many times at night. I was like, this is not my favorite thing to do. And I think that's another conversation to be had about guilt is working. The working mom guilt. That's like a whole nother beast. But when a mom says like, I enjoy working, it's like, oh my goodness, it kind of goes against what we think of this idealized mother. Why would she feel so good about being away from her children? But for so many moms, it fills their cup. It makes them feel like themselves. It gives them a sense of identity and a purpose. And that's great. For some moms, they don't want to do that. And that actually does not make them feel like themselves. And they don't want to have to do any of those things. That's great too. And I think we have to embrace the idea that we can all be doing different things and making different choices and having different feelings because we were all raised so vastly different. We all have so many different values and upbringings and experiences. It's okay to have that and come to parenthood with that. And it does not make one of us better than the other. It just means that we're all doing this a little bit differently. Yeah, we're all fulfilled by different things. So it's like, do the work in finding what fulfills you as like a whole human being and try and make that happen. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. All right. Well,
Okay, we are running out of time, but I thought to end, you could tell us where people can find you. And I know you have courses with, I'm supposed to record soon with Erica. She lives nearby, so we were going to do like an in-person podcast swap. But yeah, so tell us about your courses and where people can find you.
Yes. So I am Psyched Mommy on every social media platform. It's on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Pinterest. I primarily hang out on Instagram. My website is www.psychedmommy.com. I have courses, yes. So it's basically, I have like an entire postpartum course that is offered for moms in particular to just navigate the challenges. And that's called Keeping Mommy in Mind. You'll find that on my website. I have a burnout course on how to overcome parental burnout. And then Erica and I have a course together called All the Rage. And it's really navigating these feelings of anger, irritability, and rage that we can have in motherhood and how we can do this whole thing, this whole gig, by yelling less and connecting more with our children, because we know that motherhood it's a mother. So it's tough.
Yeah.
So there are many offerings there, but yeah, that's primarily where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Yeah, maybe when I chat with Erica, we can go over the rage topic, because that's such a popular topic as well, because it's one of those things that you experience, you think you're the only one experiencing it, and you're like, what is wrong with me? Like, you start the shame spiral. So yeah, that's a really good topic. So yeah, well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm on a roll.